The UNS Olive Branch floated in the darkness above Earth like a white dove made of steel and hope. Inside the observation deck, Ambassador Chen stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the planet slowly rotate beneath her feet. 47 flags hung along the curved walls, representing every nation that had contributed to this moment. 8 billion people watched from below, their eyes fixed on screens, their hearts filled with wonder and fear in equal measure. 6 months had passed since the Zelthari Concordat first made contact. Their message had appeared simultaneously on every communication network humanity possessed. The translation was perfect, the tone friendly, and the promise incredible. They called themselves guides to younger civilizations. They offered friendship, technology, and a place among the stars. For a species that had spent centuries looking up at the night sky and wondering if they were alone, the answer had finally arrived. Now, the Zelthari were coming to meet them face to face. Chen turned as Captain Marcus Webb entered the observation deck. The veteran officer had fought in the Belt Wars, back when humanity's greatest conflicts were still against itself. His face carried the lines of someone who had seen too much violence, and his eyes held a permanent skepticism that Chen both understood and appreciated. "They're here," Webb said simply. Through the massive windows, a ship appeared. It was nothing like the crude human vessels that surrounded it. The Zelthari ship looked like it had been grown rather than built, all flowing curves and crystalline surfaces that caught Earth sunlight and split it into rainbows. It was beautiful in a way that made human engineering look clumsy and primitive by comparison. No weapons were visible anywhere on its hull. Chen felt her heart beat faster. This was it. Humanity's first real conversation with an alien species. Everything depended on the next few hours. The Zelthari delegation arrived through an airlock connection. There were 5 of them, tall and elegant with skin that shimmered like oil on water. They moved with a grace that suggested they came from a world with lighter gravity than Earth. Their leader, who introduced himself as Hierarch Velshon, wore robes that seemed to shift colors as he moved. His face was difficult to read, with features that were almost human but not quite. His eyes were too large, his fingers too long, and when he smiled, there were too many teeth. "Ambassador Chen," Velshon said, his voice coming through a small device on his chest that translated his words into perfect English. "What an honor to finally meet you in person. Your species has accomplished so much in such a short time. We have watched your progress with great interest." The words were kind, but something about them made Chen's spine stiffen. Watched. For how long? And why hadn't they made contact sooner? She pushed the questions aside and smiled warmly. "Hierarch Velshon, welcome to the Olive Branch. Humanity is honored by your presence. We have much to learn from you." The diplomatic chamber had been prepared with care. Human gifts lined one wall, paintings from every culture, recordings of music that spanned centuries, samples of literature translated into mathematical concepts that any technological species could decode. The Zelthari examined them with what seemed like genuine appreciation. Velshon lingered over a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond the music itself. "Remarkable," he said. "Your species has such emotional depth, such passion. It is rare among younger civilizations. The phrase appeared again. Chen made a mental note of it. The gift exchange continued. The Zelthari presented humanity with a data core containing what they claimed was an introduction to their technology. Medical advances, energy production methods, and faster-than-light communication techniques. It was everything humanity had dreamed of receiving. But as Chen accepted the crystalline device, she noticed that Velshon's smile never quite reached his eyes. Below the diplomatic chamber, in the sensor control room, Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo stared at her display with growing unease. She was 26 years old, fresh out of the academy, and this was supposed to be the greatest day of her life. First contact, the beginning of a new era for humanity. But something was wrong. Her passive sensors had picked up strange energy fluctuations the moment the Zelthari ship arrived. At first, she had dismissed them as normal background radiation from an alien vessel, but the fluctuations were getting stronger and they had a pattern to them. A rhythm, like a heartbeat. She ran the data through her analysis software 3 times. Each time, the results came back the same. The energy signature wasn't coming from the Zelthari ship in front of them. It was coming from somewhere else. Somewhere nearby but invisible to normal sensors, Sarah turned to her superior, Commander Hernandez. The older woman was watching the diplomatic feed on her own screen, her face relaxed and happy. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange," Sarah said, keeping her voice professional. "There's an energy signature that doesn't match the Zelthari vessel. It's possible there's another ship nearby that we can't see." Hernandez glanced at Sarah's screen, then shook her head. "It's probably just interference from their propulsion system. Their technology is far beyond ours. We're going to see a lot of readings we don't understand. But Commander, Lieutenant, today is about peace, not paranoia. Let the diplomats do their job." Hernandez's voice was firm but not unkind. "The Zelthari came here unarmed and offering friendship. Let's not insult them by treating them like an invasion force." Sarah bit her lip and turned back to her console. Hernandez was probably right. She was young, inexperienced, and seeing threats where none existed. But as she watched the energy fluctuations grow stronger on her display, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. In the diplomatic chamber, Velshan had begun presenting the terms of humanity's integration into the Concordat. He spoke of trade routes and shared technology, of protection from hostile species and guidance through the complexities of galactic politics. His words painted a picture of a bright future where humanity would take its rightful place among the stars. But as Ambassador Chen listened, she began to notice the small details hidden in Velshan's generous offer. The way he spoke of protection implied that humanity needed protecting. The way he described guidance suggested that humanity couldn't be trusted to make its own decisions. And when he mentioned the treaty terms, the words integration and incorporation appeared far more often than partnership or alliance. Chen's diplomatic training kicked in. She smiled and nodded and asked clarifying questions while her mind raced through the implications. This wasn't an offer of friendship between equals. This was something else entirely. And somewhere in the darkness above Earth, invisible to every human sensor, something vast and ancient waited in perfect silence. The treaty document appeared on the holographic display between Ambassador Chen and Hierarch Velshan. It was written in both Zelthari script and English, the translation so perfect that Chen suspected advanced artificial intelligence had created it. The document was long, filled with legal language that would take human lawyers weeks to fully analyze. But Velshan seemed to expect an answer immediately. "As you can see," the Zelthari diplomat said, gesturing at the floating text with his long fingers, "the terms are quite generous. Your species will gain access to technologies that would take you thousands of years to develop on your own. You will be protected by the full military might of the Concordat. Your people will be free to travel among the stars." Chen read through the opening sections carefully. On the surface, everything Velshan said was true. The Zelthari offered medical technology that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries. Energy production methods that would end resource scarcity. Faster than light travel that would open up the galaxy. It was everything humanity had ever dreamed of receiving. But as Chen scrolled deeper into the document, she found the clauses that made her blood run cold. Humanity would surrender control of its military forces to Concordat oversight. All weapons development would require Zelthari approval. Earth's natural resources would be managed by Concordat efficiency experts. Political decisions affecting more than a single nation would need to be reviewed by Concordat advisors. The list went on and on, each clause carefully worded to sound reasonable while stripping away another piece of human sovereignty. "This is quite comprehensive," Chen said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll need time to review these terms with my legal experts and present them to Earth's governments. A decision of this magnitude cannot be rushed." For the first time since their meeting began, Velshan's pleasant expression flickered. It was only for a moment, a brief tightening around his two large eyes, but Chen caught it. The Zelthari diplomat had expected immediate acceptance. He was not pleased by the delay. "Of course," Velshan said smoothly. "We understand that younger species often need time to process complex agreements. However, I must stress that this offer is time-sensitive. The Concordat has many responsibilities across the galaxy. We cannot wait indefinitely for humanity's decision." "How long do we have?" Chen asked. "Shall we say 48 hours? Velshan's smile widened, showing those too many teeth. "Surely a species as intelligent as yours can see the wisdom in this arrangement within 2 days." Chen nodded slowly. 48 hours to decide the fate of humanity's freedom. It wasn't enough time, and Velshan knew it. The pressure was intentional. While the diplomats talked, Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo had stopped pretending to focus on her assigned duties. The energy fluctuations she had detected earlier were now impossible to ignore. They had grown stronger, more defined, and her sensors were finally beginning to paint a picture of what was generating them. It was big. Terrifyingly big, and it was hiding in orbit above Earth's major population centers. Sarah's hands moved quickly across her console, running unauthorized deep-level scans that would probably get her court-martialed under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Every instinct she had was screaming that humanity was in danger, and she wasn't going to sit quietly while everyone else celebrated first contact. The scan results appeared on her screen, and Sarah felt the color drain from her face. The energy signature was coming from a massive object in stealth orbit. Her sensors couldn't get a clear image through whatever cloaking technology it was using, but the computer estimated its size at over 5 kilometers long. It was a warship. It had to be. Nothing that big served any other purpose. Sarah reached for her communication panel to alert Commander Hernandez, but the panel went dark before her fingers touched it. She tried to restart it, but nothing happened. The console was completely locked out. Confused, she ran a diagnostic, and the results made her heart stop. The lockout command had come from outside the olive branch. It had come from the Zelthari diplomatic vessel. They had just remotely accessed a human military ship's internal systems without permission. They had just shut down a human officer's station to prevent her from reporting something they didn't want reported. The peaceful, friendly Zelthari had just committed an act of cyber warfare. Sarah grabbed the datapad from her station, yanking it free from its docking port. The information about the hidden warship was stored on its isolated memory. She had to get it to Captain Webb or Ambassador Chen before it was too late. She ran for the door. In the diplomatic chamber, one of the human scientists on Chen's team raised his hand hesitantly. Dr. Richard Ashworth was an astrophysicist who specialized in colonization patterns. He had been studying the Zelthari data core, trying to understand their history and culture. "Hierarch Velshan," Ashworth said, his voice respectful but curious, "I've been reviewing your historical records, and I noticed something interesting. You mention integrating 23 other species into the Concordat over the past 400 years. Could you tell us more about how those integrations proceeded? Did those species also receive offers similar to ours?" The question was innocent, asked with genuine academic interest. But the effect it had on Velshan was immediate and dramatic. The Zelthari diplomat's shimmer skin changed color slightly, darkening in a way that suggested anger or alarm. He recovered quickly, but not before everyone in the room noticed the change. "Each integration is unique," Velshan said carefully. "Every species has different needs and different levels of readiness for galactic civilization. The Concordat tailors its approach to each situation, but they all eventually integrated," Ashworth pressed. "I don't see any records of species declining the offer." "Because declining would be foolish," Velshan said, and for the first time his voice carried an edge. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, Dr. Ashworth. Species that attempt to stand alone rarely survive long. The Concordat offers protection from threats that you cannot yet imagine." Ambassador Chen felt the puzzle pieces clicking into place in her mind. 23 species integrated in 400 years. No records of anyone refusing. Integration, not alliance. Protection from threats that conveniently required surrendering all military independence. This wasn't first contact. This was a recruitment pitch for a protection racket. "Hierarch Velshan," Chen said quietly, "I need to ask you a direct question. What happens to species that decline your offer of integration?" The diplomatic chamber went silent. Even the air circulation systems seemed to hold their breath. Velshan looked at Chen for a long moment, and his pleasant mask finally fell away completely. What remained was something cold and ancient and utterly without mercy. "That is a hypothetical question, Ambassador. No species has ever been foolish enough to decline." "Until now," Chen said. "Humanity appreciates your offer, Hierarch Velshan, but we must respectfully decline. We prefer to make our own way among the stars." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Velshan stood slowly from his seat, his full height making him tower over the humans around him. His shimmer skin had gone completely dark now, like oil in deep water. "How unfortunate," Velshan said softly. "You had a choice, Ambassador Chen. That choice has expired." The Zeltari diplomat reached into his robes and pulled out a small device. He pressed something on its surface and everything changed. Outside the olive branch, the beautiful crystalline ship that had seemed so peaceful began to transform. Its hull peeled back like flower petals, revealing weapons arrays that had been hidden inside its elegant design. Energy began to gather at a dozen different points on its surface, and high above Earth, in orbit over New York and Beijing and London and Lagos, space itself began to shimmer and tear. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo burst onto the command bridge just as the alarms started screaming. In her hand, the datapad displayed the proof that humanity had walked straight into a trap. The Zeltari dreadnought appeared above Earth like a nightmare made solid. 5 kilometers of alien warship materialized out of nothing as its cloaking technology disengaged. The ship was black as deep space, covered in geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Weapons bristled from every surface, and at its bow, a massive cannon pointed straight down at the planet below. 12 billion people looked up and saw their own extinction hovering in the sky. On the bridge of the olive branch, Captain Marcus Webb stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His 30 years of military experience had taught him to assess threats quickly and accurately. The dreadnought outmassed every ship in Earth's defense fleet combined. Its energy reading suggested weapons that could crack planets, and it was positioned perfectly to strike at humanity's major population centers with no warning. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo stumbled onto the bridge, breathing hard from her run through the corridors. She thrust her datapad at Webb, her voice shaking with urgency. "Captain, I tried to warn them. There was something in orbit. I detected it 20 minutes ago, but my console was locked out remotely. The Zeltari shut down my station to keep me from reporting." Webb grabbed the datapad and scanned through Sarah's sensor logs. His jaw clenched as he saw the evidence. The energy signature had been there all along, growing stronger as the hidden ship charged its weapons. The Zeltari had been planning this from the moment they arrived. Maybe from the moment they first made contact 6 months ago. "Commander Hernandez," Webb said, his voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. "Sound General Quarters. Get me a firing solution on that dreadnought, and someone get Ambassador Chen back here immediately." Hernandez looked at the tactical display and swallowed hard. "Captain, we can't fight that thing. It's suicide." "I know," Webb said grimly, "but we're going to try anyway." In the diplomatic chamber, Ambassador Chen stood face-to-face with Hierarch Velshan. The Zeltari diplomat no longer pretended to be friendly. His shimmer skin had gone completely black, and his 2 large eyes reflected no light at all. "You had your chance for a peaceful integration," Velshan said. "Now we will demonstrate why younger species should not refuse the Concordate's guidance. Your satellites are already disabled. Your communications networks are failing, and in 1 hour, if you do not surrender completely, we will begin reducing your cities to rubble. We will continue until your species has been returned to a pre-industrial state. Then, after a few generations of suffering, we will return and offer you another chance to join us. By then, you will be much more cooperative." Chen felt rage burning in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "You came here pretending to be friends. You offered us gifts and technology. All of it was a lie." "Not a lie," Velshan corrected. "An opportunity. The Concordate does not believe in wasting resources on warfare when manipulation is more efficient. We offer species a choice. Integrate willingly and keep your pride, or resist and be broken. Most choose integration. The few who resist eventually beg for it. And if we never surrender?" Velshan's laugh was like breaking glass. "Then in a few centuries we will visit your ruins and take what we want from the ashes. Either way, Earth's resources become Concordate property. The only variable is how many of your people survive to serve us." Throughout the chamber, the human delegation stood frozen in shock. They had come here believing in peace and friendship. They had brought gifts and opened their hearts. And all of it had been a trap. The Zeltari had been planning humanity's conquest since the first message appeared on their screens. Chen tapped the emergency beacon hidden in her sleeve. Security personnel burst into the room seconds later, weapons drawn, but the Zeltari delegation simply stood there unconcerned. They made no attempt to defend themselves because they didn't need to. The real threat was 5 kilometers long and hanging in orbit above Earth. Back on the bridge, Webb watched his tactical display fill with new contacts. Earth's defense fleet was scrambling, 12 military vessels racing toward intercept positions between the dreadnought and the planet. They were destroyers and frigates, built for fighting human opponents in the Belt Wars. against Zelthari technology. They were toys, but they were all humanity had. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Zelthari ship, the communications officer reported. Broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through, Webb ordered. Velshan's face appeared on every screen aboard every human vessel in orbit. His message was simple and devastating. People of Earth, your leaders have made a foolish choice. They have refused the Concordate's offer of friendship and protection. As a result, you now face the consequences of their pride. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. All military forces will stand down. All governments will transfer authority to Concordate administrators. All weapons will be deactivated. If you comply, your species will be allowed to continue existing as a client state of the Concordate. If you resist, we will demonstrate the price of defiance. The transmission ended, and in its place, a countdown timer appeared on every screen. 60 minutes until the Zelthari began their assault. On Earth, panic spread like wildfire. 8 billion people watched the countdown tick away and knew they were powerless to stop what was coming. Parents held their children. Lovers held each other. Prayers were whispered in 1,000 languages to 1,000 different gods, and everyone waited to see if humanity's leaders would save them or doom them. Webb stared at the tactical display and did the math in his head. The Zelthari dreadnought could probably destroy his entire fleet without sustaining serious damage. Its shields alone could likely absorb everything humanity threw at it. Fighting was hopeless. But Marcus Webb hadn't survived the Belt Wars by making the smart choice. He had survived by being too stubborn to quit. All ships, this is Captain Webb of the Olive Branch. I know what you're seeing on your displays. I know the odds. And I know that some of you have families down there wondering if you're going to save them or let them die. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to position ourselves between that monster and Earth. We're going to make the Zelthari go through us to get to our planet, and we're going to make them pay for every meter of space they take. The communication channel stayed silent for a long moment. Then one by one, the captains of Earth's defense fleet responded. UNS Defiant standing by. We're with you, Captain. Beijing Defense Command acknowledges. Moving to intercept position. Eurofleet Destroyer Charlemagne reporting. It's been an honor serving with you all. 12 ships moved into formation. Their weapons charging, their crews preparing for a battle they couldn't win. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had conquered 23 other species. But they were standing their ground anyway, because they were human, and humans didn't surrender their home without a fight. In the diplomatic chamber, Chen watched the timer count down on her datapad. 47 minutes left. She looked at Velshan, and the Zelthari diplomat smiled his too-many-toothed smile. Your fleet is taking up defensive positions, he observed. How pointless. They cannot stop us. Your species' technological development is centuries behind ours. This is not a battle. It is pest control. Chen met his gaze without flinching. We didn't claw our way up from caves to the stars by giving up when things looked bad. If you want Earth, you're going to have to take it. And we're going to make you bleed for it. Brave words from a species about to be enslaved, Velshan said. Maybe, Chen replied. Or maybe you made a mistake. What mistake could we possibly have made? Chen's smile was cold and sharp. You assumed we'd show you everything. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Velshan's face. Before he could respond, every alarm on the olive branch started screaming at once. On the tactical display, a new contact appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was accelerating toward Earth at speeds that should have been impossible, and it was broadcasting an activation code that only 3 people in the United Nations knew existed. Captain Webb stared at his display as the new contact resolved into something solid. His hands started shaking. Get me Admiral Torres, he said quietly. Tell her that Damocles just woke up. The UNS Retribution emerged from the darkness of the Kuiper Belt like an angry god. It was not beautiful like the Zelthari vessels. It was not elegant or graceful. It looked exactly like what it was. A weapon built by a species that had learned to fear the dark between the stars. The ship had been carved from the heart of a massive asteroid 3 years ago, when humanity first detected the strange signals that turned out to be Zelthari communications. While politicians debated whether the signals were friendly or hostile, a small group within the UN Security Council had made a different decision. They decided to prepare for the worst. Project Damocles had cost trillions of dollars, and required the cooperation of every major space power on Earth. Thousands of engineers and scientists had worked in absolute secrecy, building a ship that humanity prayed they would never need to use. They had hollowed out an asteroid, filled it with weapons that human scientists barely understood, and hidden it in the outer solar system where no one would think to look. Now, as the Zelthari dreadnought prepared to rain destruction on Earth, humanity's hidden warship came to their rescue. On the bridge of the Olive Branch, Captain Webb pulled up the classified files on Damocles. His security clearance had only given him access to the basic details. The ship existed. It was armed with experimental weapons, and in an emergency it could be activated remotely. But the specifics of its capabilities were above his pay grade. Now those specifics appeared on his screen, and Webb felt his mouth go dry. The Retribution was powered by fusion drives that sacrificed fuel efficiency for raw acceleration. It could reach velocities that would turn any human crew into paste, which was why it didn't have a human crew. The ship was controlled by an artificial intelligence system that humanity had been developing in secret for decades. Its weapons were even more terrifying. Kinetic kill vehicles that could be accelerated to relativistic speeds, missile pods loaded with nuclear warheads that made the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like firecrackers, and one experimental weapon that made Webb's blood run cold, a focused gravity lance that could tear apart the atomic bonds holding matter together. The scientists weren't entirely sure it would work. They also weren't sure it wouldn't destroy the Retribution when it fired. But they had built it anyway, because humanity needed something that could threaten a species that had conquered the stars. Hierarch Velshan watched the Retribution approach on his own tactical display, and for the first time since arriving at Earth, he felt something close to fear. His people had scanned the human solar system thoroughly before making contact. They had cataloged every major installation, every ship, every weapons platform. But somehow, impossibly, they had missed this. "What is that?" one of his subordinates asked, her voice tight with concern. "A mistake," Velshan said coldly. "Our mistake. Recall the scout fleet. All vessels are to engage that ship immediately. Do not let it reach the dreadnought." The Zelthari fleet moved with perfect coordination. 15 vessels that had been hiding in stealth orbit around Earth suddenly became visible as they broke away to intercept the Retribution. They were smaller than the dreadnought but still massive by human standards, each one capable of destroying a city in minutes. But the Retribution didn't slow down. It didn't try to evade, it simply accelerated harder, its fusion drives burning so bright that they could be seen from Earth with the naked eye. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo had been running continuous scans on the Zelthari stealth technology since discovering the dreadnought. She had given up trying to do it quietly. Her career was probably over anyway for insubordination, so she might as well be useful. And in the process of scanning, she had discovered something crucial. The Zelthari stealth systems worked by bending sensor waves around the ship, making them invisible to detection. It was brilliant technology, far beyond anything humanity had developed. But it had a weakness. The process created a specific harmonic frequency in the space around the hidden ship. It was so faint that normal sensors would dismiss it as background radiation. But if you knew what to look for and boosted your sensor gain to maximum, you could detect it. Sarah had found 15 more Zelthari ships hiding around Earth. Now, as they broke stealth to engage the Retribution, she realized what the Concordate's real plan had been. This wasn't just a show of force. This was a full invasion fleet. They had brought enough ships to occupy Earth completely, to place Zelthari troops in every major city, to ensure that humanity could never resist. She opened a channel to every military vessel in the fleet. "All ships, this is Lieutenant Okonkwo on the Olive Branch. I'm broadcasting the harmonic frequency for Zelthari stealth technology. If you calibrate your sensors to this frequency and boost gain to maximum, you can detect their hidden ships. They've been lying to us from the start. This whole fleet was waiting to invade. The information spread through Earth's defense network like lightning. Suddenly, human ships that had been flying blind could see their enemy. The 15 Zelthari vessels racing toward the Retribution lit up on every tactical display. And more importantly, their positions revealed weak points in the Concordate's formation. Captain Webb studied the new sensor data with the eyes of a veteran tactician. The Zelthari had positioned their fleet to maximize coverage of Earth's major cities. They were spread thin, each ship alone relying on stealth and superior technology to protect them. But now that humanity could see them, that positioning became a fatal weakness. All ships, new targeting data incoming, web broadcast. We can't match their firepower, but we can see them now. Focus fire on individual targets. Coordinate your attacks. Make every shot count. The human fleet broke formation and scattered, each ship racing toward a different Zelthari vessel. It was a desperate gamble. If they failed to disable the enemy ships quickly, the dreadnought would simply destroy them all. But if they succeeded, they might just buy the Retribution enough time to reach the battle. The UNS Defiant was the first to engage. The destroyer had been built for combat in the Belt Wars, designed to disable mining vessels and deal with pirates. Its weapons were crude by Zelthari standards, but they were accurate. The captain, a woman named Stella Martinez, had spent 20 years hunting criminals in the asteroid belt. She knew how to fight when outgunned. Target their sensor arrays, Martinez ordered. Blind them first, then go for their weapons. The Defiant's railguns opened fire, and kinetic slugs traveling at impossible speeds slammed into the Zelthari vessel's hull. The alien ship's shields absorbed most of the damage, but not all of it. Sensor dishes shattered. Communication arrays went dark. The Zelthari vessel tried to return fire, but its targeting systems were damaged and the shots went wide. 2 more human ships joined the attack, their missiles streaking through space. The Zelthari vessel's point defense systems destroyed most of them, but 3 got through. The explosions weren't enough to destroy the ship, but they crippled its maneuvering thrusters. Ramming speed, Martinez said calmly. The Defiant accelerated straight at the Zelthari vessel. At the last moment, Martinez and her crew abandoned ship in escape pods. The destroyer slammed into the alien warship at full velocity, and both vessels disappeared in a brief new sun. Across the orbital battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships fought with desperate ingenuity, using tactics that the Zelthari had never encountered. Debris fields became weapons, damaged vessels became bombs, and every time a Zelthari ship tried to pull back and regroup, human sensors tracked them through their stealth fields and vectored attacks to their new position. The Concordate's fleet was more powerful, but humanity had the advantage of fighting for their home. And humans, it turned out, fought very differently when their families were watching from below. Hierarch Velshan watched his carefully planned invasion begin to fall apart and felt cold rage building in his chest. How had these primitives adapted so quickly? How had they found the weakness in the stealth technology? And where had they gotten that ship that was now burning toward his dreadnought like a meteor? He had conquered 23 species. Some had resisted, but none had ever drawn blood. The Concordate's method was perfect. Arrive peacefully, present an offer that seemed generous, and then reveal the overwhelming force that made resistance pointless. Species surrendered because fighting was obviously futile, but humanity wasn't surrendering. They were dying instead, throwing themselves at the Zelthari fleet with a fury that bordered on madness, and somehow, impossibly, they were winning. All ships fall back to the dreadnought, Velshan ordered. We will regroup and crush them together. But it was already too late. The Retribution had crossed half the distance to Earth, and nothing could stop it now. The artificial intelligence controlling the ship had calculated 1,000 different attack vectors and chosen the one most likely to succeed. It wasn't trying to win a conventional battle. It was trying to destroy one specific target. And as the Zelthari dreadnought's main guns began to charge for a shot at Earth, the Retribution's gravity lance powered up in response. Across the solar system, gravitational sensors detected the massive energy buildup and screamed warnings that no one was alive to hear. Captain Webb looked at his tactical display one last time. Everyone evacuate to escape pods now. Sir, we haven't lost yet, Commander Hernandez protested. No, Webb agreed. But we're about to see a weapon that might crack this whole orbital space in half. I want my crew alive to rebuild, win or lose. The evacuation began as the Retribution and the Dreadnought raced toward their final confrontation. The UNS Retribution crossed the distance to the Zelthari Dreadnought in 14 minutes. For most of that time, the Concordate fleet fired everything they had at the approaching human warship. Energy weapons carved glowing trenches across its rocky hull. Missiles detonated in brilliant flashes against its crude armor. Kinetic rounds punched through in dozens of places, venting atmosphere that the unmanned ship didn't need. But the Retribution had been built from a solid asteroid. There was no crew to kill, no vital systems concentrated in vulnerable locations. It was simply a mountain of rock with engines on one end and weapons on the other. Destroying it would require either vaporizing the entire mass or hitting the fusion reactors buried in its core. The Zelthari never got the chance to do either. Inside the dreadnought, Hierarch Velshan watched the human ship approach and finally understood what humanity had done. They had built a weapon specifically designed to fight an enemy they had never met. They had assumed correctly that any species capable of crossing the stars would have technology superior to their own. So they hadn't tried to match that technology. They had simply built something too massive to stop easily and aimed it at their enemy's heart. It was crude. It was inelegant. It was exactly the kind of blunt force solution that primitive species would devise. And it was working. All power to forward shields, Velshan ordered. Charge the main cannon. If we cannot stop that ship, we will destroy it the moment before impact. The dreadnought's main weapon was a masterpiece of concordant engineering. It could focus enough energy to crack a continent in half. Against a single ship, even one as massive as the Retribution, it should have been more than sufficient. But the Retribution's artificial intelligence had been programmed by some of humanity's best tactical minds. It knew the dreadnought would try to destroy it at the last moment. It knew the shields would be concentrated forward. And it knew that its own gravity lance needed to be fired at point-blank range to have any chance of penetrating Zelthari defenses. So it waited until the last possible moment, accelerating straight at the dreadnought's bow, and then it fired. The gravity lance was based on technology that humanity had stolen from alien signals 3 years ago. Human scientists had spent countless hours trying to understand the mathematical principles behind artificial gravity manipulation. They had succeeded only partially. The weapon they built was unstable, unpredictable, and might very well destroy the ship firing it. But when it worked, it could tear apart the fundamental forces holding matter together. The lance fired and space itself seemed to scream. A beam of twisted gravity shot from the Retribution's bow and struck the dreadnought's power core. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the atomic bonds holding the ship's fusion reactor together began to fail. The dreadnought started to collapse inward on itself. Its shields, designed to stop external attacks, did nothing against a weapon that was tearing it apart from within. The elegant geometric patterns on its hull twisted and warped. Metal that had survived 1,000 battles crumpled like paper. Hierarch Velshan had one moment to realize that his conquest of Earth had failed. Then the reactor went critical, and 5 kilometers of Zelthari warship became a brief new star in Earth's orbit. The explosion was visible from the planet below. 8 billion people looked up and saw their would-be conquerors die. The shockwave from the blast caught the Retribution and tore it apart, sending chunks of asteroids spinning into space. But the sacrifice had been worth it. The dreadnought was gone. On the bridge of the Olive Branch, Captain Webb watched the tactical display from his escape pod. Half his fleet was gone. The Defiant, the Charlemagne, the Beijing Defense Command flagship, hundreds of good people who had given their lives to protect Earth. But they had won. The remaining Zelthari vessels broke formation and fled. Without the dreadnought to coordinate their attack and protect them from concentrated fire, they were vulnerable. Earth's surviving ships harried them all the way to the edge of the solar system, making sure they understood the cost of threatening humanity. Ambassador Chen stood in the ruined diplomatic chamber of the Olive Branch, looking at the Zelthari delegates who had tried to enslave her species. They were prisoners now, their elegant robes torn, their shimmer skin dull with shock. Velshan had died on the dreadnought, but 4 of his subordinates had been captured when human security forces stormed the chamber. "You made a mistake," Chen said quietly. "You thought we were a typical pre-contact species, naive, trusting, desperate for acceptance. And we were all of those things. But we were also paranoid. We spent the last 3 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Because humanity learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about our hopes and dreams. It only respects strength." One of the Zelthari prisoners, a female whose name translated as Shireen, looked up at Chen with something close to respect in her alien eyes. "Your species destroyed a concordant dreadnought with a single ship. That has never happened before in our history. How did you do it?" "We cheated," Chen said simply. "We built a weapon we didn't fully understand, crewed it with an artificial intelligence that probably shouldn't exist, and fired it at point-blank range because we knew we'd only get one shot. It was desperate and dangerous, and it almost didn't work. But it did work because we were willing to risk everything to stay free." The Concordat will return, Shireen warned. This was one fleet. There are others. You have made powerful enemies today. Good, Chen replied. Let them come. Let every species in the Concordat know what happened here. Let them know that Earth fought back and won. Maybe some of those 23 species you integrated will remember that they had a choice once. Maybe they'll start asking if they still do. The prisoner said nothing, but Chen could see the idea taking root. That was the thing about humanity's victory today. It wasn't just a military success. It was proof that the Concordat could be beaten, and proof was a powerful weapon all on its own. 6 months later, Ambassador Chen stood in the rebuilt communications center of the Olive Branch and watched as a new message came through on the quantum communication network. It was encoded in a format that human scientists had only recently learned to decode. The message was from a species called the Virani, one of the 23 that the Concordat had integrated 200 years ago. The message was simple. We saw what you did. We want to know how you did it. Can you help us? Chen looked at the message for a long time, thinking about the cost of that help. Earth was still recovering from the battle. They had lost hundreds of ships and thousands of people. Their satellite network was in ruins. It would take years to fully repair the damage. But the message represented something more important than military resources. It represented hope. The Concordat had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for centuries. But now that rule had a crack in it. And cracks, Chen knew, had a way of spreading. She composed a reply carefully, knowing that every word would be analyzed by Concordat intelligence. We can share what we learned. But understand that freedom isn't given, it's taken. You'll have to be willing to fight for it, to sacrifice for it, and to risk everything you have. If you're ready to do that, then yes. We can help, the reply came back within hours. We are ready. Tell us where to begin. Chen smiled and began drafting a detailed response. Earth's first contact with alien life had been a disaster. They had been lied to, threatened, and nearly conquered. But from that disaster had come something unexpected. Humanity hadn't just saved themselves. They had become a symbol of resistance for every species that had ever been forced to bow to the Concordat's rule. The age of humanity's innocence was over. The age of human naivety had ended when the Zelthari dreadnought appeared in their skies. But a new age had begun, one where Earth stood as a beacon for any species willing to fight for their freedom. Above Earth, construction crews worked around the clock on new defense platforms. These weren't hidden like the Retribution had been. They were visible, obvious, and well-armed. Earth wanted every species in the galaxy to see them and understand the message they sent. Humanity had looked into the darkness between the stars and seen predators waiting there, and instead of submitting or fleeing, they had bared their teeth and fought back. They had won once at terrible cost, and they were preparing to do it again if necessary. Because that was what humans did. They adapted. They learned. They refused to accept defeat even when defeat seemed certain. They had climbed down from the trees, walked out of Africa, crossed oceans in wooden boats, and reached for the stars with nothing but chemistry and mathematics to guide them. And now that they had reached those stars, they had discovered that the galaxy was full of empires that expected submission from younger species, empires that had forgotten what it meant to fight a species that had nothing to lose and everything to protect. The Concordat would learn that lesson eventually, maybe through more battles. Maybe through the rebellions that were beginning to stir among their subject species. But one way or another they would learn. And when they did, they would remember the day they tried to conquer Earth and found humans waiting for them with hidden warships and weapons that shouldn't work, and a stubborn refusal to go quietly into subjugation. That day the galaxy had changed. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of human resistance had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. In her quarters on the Olive Branch, Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo looked at the commendation on her screen. She had been promoted to commander and given charge of Earth's new sensor network. Her quick thinking had saved countless lives by revealing the Zelthari stealth technology. But what she kept thinking about was the moment her console had been locked out. The moment the Zelthari had reached into a human military system and shut it down without permission. That single act of arrogance had revealed more than any scan could have. It showed that the Concordat saw humanity as primitives, too backward to be a real threat. They wouldn't make that mistake again. But by then, Sarah thought, it would be too late. Humanity would be ready, and the next species that came offering friendship with hidden weapons would find Earth prepared to answer force with force. She closed the commendation and opened a file marked Future Threats Analysis. It contained everything humanity had learned from the Zelthari, everything they had reverse-engineered from captured ships, and everything they planned to build in the next decade. It was an impressive list, and it was just the beginning. Because humanity had learned the most important lesson the galaxy had to teach. In the darkness between the stars, the only species that survived were the ones willing to fight for their survival. And humanity, it turned out, was very willing to fight.